Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is pretty exciting for me. This one especially is really cool because I stumbled across a game a few months ago just doom scrolling through Instagram, and there was an awesome robot in an Instagram ad and I was like, ooh, what's that? And I stumbled on Blackout from Enemy Spotted Studios. So if you're unaware, just like I was unaware, Enemy Spotted Studios had made a couple of games in the past, specifically Kill Wager, which was a near future sort of like mercenaries fighting it out on humanity's first and only colony out in space, kind of, waging war, shadow wars over resources. And Blackout is a new game that continues the narrative that was established in Kill Wager. Now, the two-player starter set, you end up getting two teams, and so the local guys here in the Bay Area, there's a group of us that are actually going to start playing Blackout this weekend. So I needed to get one of those teams painted up, and I chose the Harlow First Reaction Force for my team. This box comes with 3 units, which is pretty much all you need to get started with the game. It's a great value. You have the option of buying 3D printed resin figures, which are single piece and require 0 assembly. Just a little cleanup of the resin supports, which is super simple. Or you can get metal miniatures, which a lot of them I think are in 2 pieces, like the arms are 1 piece and then the body, and you just glue the arms to the body. Now, I opted for the 3D prints, and I can attest these miniatures are freaking gorgeous. So we are going to want to paint these quickly because I have less than a week to get these ready for my first game. But then 2, because these miniatures are so detailed, we're going to want to use a lot of transparent paints so that we're not clogging up all of this gorgeous detail that was sculpted into these miniatures. Now, they are, quote unquote near future hard science fiction. I would be more than happy to put these figures on the table in a modern warfare rule set. Obviously not the robots, but the humans actually look like modern day special forces operators with, maybe like 1 or 2 little sneaky sci-fi elements snuck in that like you're really not going to see unless you hold the thing up to your face. They look absolutely awesome. So by the way, this video is not sponsored. I am just a huge fanboy right now. But we're going to go down to the hobby desk. I'll show you guys how I got everything prepped and ready for painting, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So let's talk a little bit about prep. So for the Harlow Force, you've got a bunch of humans, and I've primed them all in a solid desert tan, and I'll talk about why in a second. And then for their little AI robots, there's 2 of them. I went ahead and primed those in silver. And now this extra guy over here, so Blackout has a couple of expansions already out. And so in the Wetwork expansion, which I believe was the very first expansion, they introduced these sort of like superhero units called handlers, where it's a 1-man, almost sort of super soldier. And so there are 4 handlers available right now. 3 of them are based on the 3 main factions. So this is the Harlow themed handler. And then that last guy, there's sort of like a free agent. Keep a lookout though, I'm going to be painting that one soon. So we've got a smattering of miniatures. Now the reason why I opted for Desert Tan is so whenever I'm painting sort of modern or near future miniatures, I kind of like to base my paint scheme on a particular, armed forces regiment in a specific theater. And so for these guys, I was kind of thinking like US infantry at the beginning of the Iraq War in the early 2000s. So there's a lot of light brown, light tan in that color scheme. So the Desert Tan primer is going to work perfectly for us. All right, so we're going to get started with the human figures first. And the very first paint we're going to use is the Army Painter Light Tone Quick Shade. Now, I believe now they call it Soft Tone, but it's pretty much the same thing. It's a very light brown wash, and we're just going to apply this literally all over the miniatures. So the goal here is, without staining the fatigues too dark, we just really want to bring out all of this texture that's in the sculpts. And now for some bits, we're going to go over them with more colors. But then for other bits, this will actually kind of be our primary shadow color. So we want to get nice even coverage. We don't want it to stain too heavily. So make sure you move this around and work it into all of your recesses. Now that that light tone is dry, we've got this kind of really nice shaded sort of desert yellow going on. So now we want to reclaim some of those highlights and bring the color of all of the fabric back up and bring out a lot more of that detail. So this is Scale Color 75 Mojave White. My label's a little faded, but we're going to dry brush this. All right, so we got a nice big dry brush. Going to dip that in the paint and then work it all into these bristles. So now all we're going to do is lightly just dry brush all of our miniatures. Right, so with that dry brushing done, now we're going to move on to painting all of the pouches and the straps, the webbing, and the armor on these miniatures. So for that, I am using Creed Camo from Citadel Contrast, and I thinned it out maybe for every 3 parts paint, 1 part speed paint medium. We want this to be somewhat translucent so that when we apply it over this sort of brownish color that we've got on the miniatures, the green shows through, but it doesn't completely overpower. This will give you kind of an olive tone, which will look really good on all of these elements. Alright, so next up we have a small detail that we are going to take care of, and that is going to be the boots. So for the utility boots, given that this is a, sort of desert operation that this soldier would be operating in most of the time, we're going to turn to Sand Golem from the Army Painter's Speed Paint range. All right, so I've got this on my wet palette, and this is kind of a really nice ochre color that reminds me of, like Timberlands or like utility boots. So we just want to get a layer of this down, and all of that dry brushing and such that we had done previously will allow us to get some highlights in just one coat. Alright, and next up, so for all of the metallics that are on the miniature, for military figures, I don't really like using true metallic paints. So we're going to shoot for a dark blue-gray, and Army Painter Occultist Cloak from their Speed Paint 2.0 range is absolutely perfect for this. So I've got some on the palette, so I can control it. And I'm also using a liner brush. Actually, I'm not using a liner brush. Let me swap brushes. Now I'm using a liner brush. And that's just going to give me a lot of control over where this goes, because we're going to be coming up against areas that we've already painted. So for the weapon, we're just going to go ahead and give a coat of this. And then also areas like this exoskeleton that's running down the leg, we'll want to hit those areas as well. And then I don't know what this thing at the back is supposed to be, but we're going to paint that metallic as well. And this will just give you that nice dark blue-gray that'll kind of look like a matte black that you'll see on a lot of metallic military gear. With that step done, the miniatures are actually really starting to come together. So the sort of last main detail that we have on the human figures that we need to get base counted is a few of the miniatures have exposed skin. So we need to go ahead and put some color on that. Now, again, with these guys operating in more of a desert environment, I'd imagine they'd have more of a tan skin tone. So for the Caucasian tan skin, I'm going to turn to Crusader skin from Army Painter Speed Paint. And then for darker skin tones, so maybe like, you know, your black people or your South Asians, Pure Grime from the AK Interactive Deep Shades range works really well for that. So if you've seen any of like my Conquest videos, I paint a lot of Sorcerer Kings, which are sort of fantasy, sort of like Middle Eastern, Indian themed. I use this color a lot for a lot of their human characters. It's really, really good. So to get started, I'm just going to start with the Caucasian skin tone. And so this gentleman here has a little bit of his forearm exposed. And pretty much as long as you get all parts of it covered. All right, so we'll set those to the side and let those dry. All right, and so with the Pure Grime, so these deep shades from AK, they work like your speed paints and contrast paints and whatnot, but I do find that they are thicker and also less pigmented. So what I find with a lot of these is that you will need 2 coats, and you'll need to let them dry completely in between those coats in order to get the best color if you're trying to use it like a stereotypical speed paint. Now, they also have lots of other uses, so they're really good for like color correcting and color toning because they're so translucent. But a lot of these are essentially almost like a thick glaze straight out of the pot. So you'll need 2 coats of this to get really nice color. So that second coat of the Pure Grime is still drying, but you can still see, you know, how nice of a replication of that dark skin tone this paint will give you. All right, so moving on. So we really only have one highlight that we need to apply. We've already highlighted the pants when we did the dry brushing step, and actually using the Creed camo gave us some highlights on the webbing and the armor and such. But anywhere where you sort of had flat areas where this may have not dried as nicely, like here on that shoulder, we're just gonna add highlights with scale 75 field gray to smooth those areas out a little bit. And we're not being super heavy with this, we're just smoothing out some of those flat areas. And this is slightly lighter than the highlights that field gray will give you, but it still looks really good. So now we're going to go back to the quick shade light tone, and we're going to use 1 part of this to 4 parts speed paint medium. And we're going to smooth out the transitions between our base coat on the fatigues into the highlights. And so thinning this out turns it almost into a glaze that will behave like a speed paint. So it's not going to be really strong in tone, which is perfect because we want the fatigues to still look very light, but this will just gently tint the highlight areas into our shadow areas and give just a little bit more punch to those shadows. Alright, so we've still got just a couple of little base coats that need to be done. So for this person, they have a little bit of their hair showing at the front of their headgear. So I'm going to make them a brunette and use Citadel Wildwood. So because the hair is nicely textured, using a contrast paint for this is perfect. And all we need to do is just apply a nice thin layer of this over the hair. Right, and then this happy little weirdo has some sort of face mask or maybe had cybernetic face surgery. I don't really know what that is, but it's creepy. So you could really paint this any color you wanted. I'm going to hit it with a little contrast Grip Charger Gray and give it a nice sort of lighter blue-gray that will tie into the rest of the miniature. Alright, so with all of that work done, our base coats on all of the human guys are now done. So we do have some additional steps that we're going to do with these that are going to use oils, and then we also have some glossy elements that need to be done absolutely at the end after we've already matte varnished our mini. So since we're going to be working with some oils, I'm going to take these away and give them a nice satin varnish that's going to make working with the oil paints a lot easier to do the cleanup steps. So while these guys are drying, we'll move on to our AI bots. And the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to dry brush this silver with Ammo by Mig's Dio Light Metal. Right, so we're just going to dry brush this on in a somewhat circular motion all over the figure. This will make sure that we hit all of the hard edges. Alright, with that out of the way, we're now ready to move on to our base coats. And first up, we're going to turn back to Occultist Cloak. And we're going to put this all over all of the metal bits of the miniature. And now for the green and yellow to tie it into the rest of the force, we're going to be leaning on the traditional layering technique. So if you get this on the armor or any of the fabric bits, that's okay. We're going to be painting over those areas. I did want to mention the sort of face part of the head. Make sure you leave that in the bright silver. We're going to do something different from the rest of the body with that section. So while that's drying, we can go ahead and use Grip Charger Gray on the face plates of our robots. And this is just a really, really quick way to get some really nice light blue shading in this area. And with that silver underneath it, it'll be really, really bright. So next up, we're going to work on these canvas areas. So there's one on each arm and then one on each thigh. And to make the bots sort of match the humans, we're going to be painting those in a very light tan color. But first, we need to base coat them. So we're going to base them with Sahara Yellow from scale 75. And because we're going over some darker colors, you might need a couple of coats because you want this coverage to be relatively solid. now that we've got the Sahara yellow down, we're going to move on to Mojave White. And you can go as technical with this as you want. You can layer straight up to the Mojave White, or you can do some blending like I am by mixing in a little bit of the Sahara yellow and then working in stages. But whichever route you decide to go, we want to get this a lot brighter. Since I am doing the sort of multi-stage layering, I'm going to try and cover most of the surface, but leave some of the very darkish shadowed areas in the Sahara yellow. So with that very broad highlight down, we're now coming in with pure Mojave White. And we're really just kind of stippling this around the raised surfaces. So give the fabric the appearance of sort of being like sun bleached, since these units are operating out in the desert. So now we're going to wash those areas just like we did on the human models, with a little bit of Army Painter Speed Town, or Soft Town. So while that's drying, we can move on to our hard armor areas. So the knee pads, there's also elbow pads here. We're also going to do the hands and the kit bags as well. And we're going to go to scale 75 field gray again. And we just want to get a nice solid base coat on all of those areas. And to finish off those green areas, we're going to take some Creed Camo and mix that about 50-50 with some Speed Paint Medium. And now I've swapped over to my liner brush for more control, and we're just going to use this as a wash on all of those green areas. This will help bring out those details and also help the color to match the human members of the force. All right, and with that last step applied, these AI units are ready for some satin varnish. So I'll take those away, get them sprayed down, let that cure, and then we'll come back and work on the oil paints. All right, so all of the figures have been satin varnished, and now we are ready to use some enamel paints. Now, I know I've been talking about oils all video. Enamels work very similar to oils. You have a lot of the same properties, but they tend to dry a little bit faster. And then also, the Tamiya Panaline accent color that I'm going to use here comes with a built-in brush. So there's very little, cleanup associated with using this in particular. So that's why I opted to switch. But you could use enamels or oils. Either one will work for what I'm about to show you. So what we're going to do is hit all of the green areas. And because of the capillary action, this will want to run down into the recesses and flow very, very nicely. So there's very little work that you need to do. Just kind of run this all over those areas. And anywhere you have green butting up against a tan, you can kind of let it get down in that recess. And that will give you some, I'm using brown, but it'll give you some lining, some extra shade to help differentiate those two colors from each other. So while that brown is setting up, we need to let that sit for about 5 minutes or so until it's no longer wet to the touch before we can remove the excess. We're going to move on to our next color. So we're going to use the AK Wargame Green Fluorescent Liquid Pigment. So this is pigment essentially suspended in an enamel solution, with a little bit of a binder in there as well. So this will set up on its own, and once it's dry, you don't really need to do anything else to it. So we're going to drop a drop of this into the front of the binoculars to give it a nice green glow, nice and easy. And again, we're going to make use of the capillary action. So all we need to do is get some of this on our brush, make sure it's not too overloaded, and then just touch it to that area. And the paint will just run right off your brush into that recess. And now for the eye sockets on the faceplates, we're going to do pretty much the same thing, but we're going to use the blue fluorescent from AK. And this is going to work the same exact way. Just get a little bit of that pigment on our brush. Make sure we get off all of the excess. And then we're just going to touch it into that recess and let the paint flow off of the brush into the cavity. Now, to remove enamels and oil paints, as well as to clean your brush, because these are not water soluble, you'll want to have some odorless mineral spirits. So I personally use the Gamsol. You can pick this up in a fine art store, but you get a lot of the product for your money. Now, hobby manufacturers will sell odorless mineral spirits. You can get those from almost any manufacturer that sells oil or enamel products, so like AK or Ammo. So I've just decanted a little bit of this into a glass container so I can clean off my brush. And then I've got these special Tamiya cotton buds. They're tightly wound and they're in that triangle shape, which is really useful for cleaning off miniatures, but you can use a standard cotton bud or a makeup sponge to do this. So all you need to do is just wet your cotton bud like I did. Then all we're going to do is just run this over the raised surfaces of the miniature, and that will wipe that enamel right off and just leave it down in the recesses where we want it. So here go a couple of figures where the effects have already dried, just so that you can kind of see what the final effect looks like. So now you'll also notice that I've got some basing texture on the figures now. So I use the Geek Gaming Scenics base ready range. This is a mix of their gray and black urban rubble. So if you want to see how to use those products, you can check out this video up in the cards, but by no means do you have to follow this. You can use whatever basing scheme you're most comfortable with. I just really like this because it's no mess. You don't have to paint your bases. You literally just slap down some glue, dunk this in, and then put a little glue on top to seal it. But now that all of the enamel effects are done, we're going to let everything dry overnight, hit it with a matte varnish, and then we'll wrap up the video with a few final details. Alright, so we've got our minis matte coated, and we're almost done. We're going to do 2 additional steps to finish these off, and they're very, very quick. So there are a couple points on almost all of the miniatures where you kind of want a really bright, sort of like shiny, glowing surface. So for here, like on the sight, on the gun, and she's got like a, transmission radio pole or something that'll look really cool with a light on it. And then she's holding a data pad as well. So now to paint all of these areas across the miniatures, I'm going to be using the Ammo by Mig crystal paints, specifically Crystal Red and Crystal Light Blue. Now, these dry super, super glossy, so they're super reflective, and they're transparent, and they're meant to go over either a clear part or a really, really shiny sort of metal surface. So the brightest metal paint that you have, like a chrome, or in this case, I used the Dio dry brush light metal. So I've already prepared all of those areas that we're going to hit. So with these paints, there's not really much to it. All we're going to do is get a little bit on our brush. You don't want it too overloaded. Then all you have to do is just dab this onto the area, just like that, and then let that dry. Now I'm going to do the other areas in blue and show you that as well. So here on her data pad, get that in focus. And then we'll also hit her little antenna thing here. And if you run it down past the metal area, so I don't know how well it showed up on camera, but I only painted like the top half of the pole in metal. But if you put the blue on the whole thing, this will give you sort of a really nice glowing effect going down the whole pole. Now, once you get that on, you want to let it sit. You don't want to touch it or you'll take the paint right off. So if you're unsure of how it's going to look, just let it dry, and then you can gauge if you need a second coat or not. And now the very last thing we're going to do is add a little bit of color to our basing material. So now to do that, we're going to turn back to the AK Interactive Enamel Liquid Pigment range. This time, though, we're going to be using Rubble Dust and Ochre Earth as a highlight tone. Now, with these, again, you do want to make sure you shake them up really, really good. So I'm going to give these a shake, and then we'll get started with the Rubble Dust. So applying this could not be simpler. You just load some up on your brush, and you just touch it to the base. And now for this first layer, we do want to cover pretty much the whole base. So just go around and get a little bit of this down. You don't need to like super soak the base. Just get a nice big drop on your brush, touch it to the base, and you'll see it kind of run around and spread. Right, and now while our base is still wet, we're going to come in with the Ochre Earth. We're just going to tap this just on the edge and let it kind of run into toward the center. And now you'll kind of notice as I'm applying this, you kind of get a really harsh line. We're going to handle that in just a second. So now we're going to swap back to our Rubble Dust. And we're going to specifically touch this to where the Rubble Dust and the ochre meet. And so this is just going to do a little bit of wet blending right on the base and give us a nice little fade from that light yellow sand color into our darker Rubble Dust. All right, so this base is still wet. But here is one that I did the previous evening, and so you can kind of see what that effect will look like once this dries. Now, because this is an enamel product, you do want to, leave it plenty of time to dry. I like to have these sit overnight, but if you're in a hurry, you can speed up the drying time with a hair dryer on the lowest setting. With these being 3D prints, though, you want to be very, very careful. The resin will get bendy if it gets too hot. So, again, I just really recommend letting it sit for a couple of hours. And then you can go ahead and paint your base rims. Now, to do that, I know everybody's got their own preference. I personally like using Vallejo Black Surface Primer. It's a little bit harder wearing than just using standard paint. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get my base rims painted, and we'll take a look at some photos of the finished miniatures. All right, and here are some pictures of the finished miniatures. I posed them with some of the new Kill Team Hivestorm terrain. Unfortunately, when I painted that, there's not really a good way for me to film using aerosol cans and airbrushing and everything. So I didn't get to make a video for that. So I felt like it was a pretty great opportunity to, actually take some more awesome photography and have some terrain in the pictures. So I used that. So I'm showing that off as well. But to focus on these miniatures, I really, really love the way that they turned out. There's just so much detail crammed on these miniatures, and using those really thin transparent paints allowed all of that to really, really show through. So hats off to Enemy Spotted Studios for creating these awesome miniatures. I absolutely am super stoked to get my first game in this weekend, and I will definitely report back to everyone on how it goes. I read through all of the rules and everything. It's a very simple game at its core, so there's not a ton of rules. But eventually, I will do sort of a separate, sort of like what is Blackout, sort of introduction to the game. I want to get the other starter faction, the Manticore Boars team, all painted up before I actually film that video. So there'll be another painting video or two before I put that one out. But yeah, definitely if you're into the, near future hard science fiction sort of thing like I am, definitely keep it locked in here. There will be plenty of Blackout content coming. There's actually a new expansion getting ready to drop where they're going to add at least one new force. There might be another faction pack I'm hearing out in the winds, and then a couple of new dusters, the big robots. So yeah, keep it locked in here. I will definitely be covering more Blackout in the future. If you're new and you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, click the little notification bells so you don't miss whenever I drop new content. And I will see you all in the next video.